Countries that have fought long years of war need rest, even if they return home victorious. Having suffered serious losses over the years, Russia was tired from its recent military victories. However, some countries need to fight continuously in order to protect themselves. Stagnation, especially in countries harboring many different ethnic groups, may pave the way for future internal complexities. Russia is struggling to survive as a warrior state with a long history of war. In countries with strong war experience, there are certain strategies applied in different areas. Contrary to the confident image Russia presents to the whole world, it has a variable attitude towards war strategies. This is not the way of strong armies. There may be compelling reasons for the constantly changing strategies of the Russian army. The invasion of Ukraine by the Russian army had only one plan. Putin and his troops were confident that they would capture Kiev in a few days. However, they had to change their strategy because of the fierce defense they faced. When the Russian army was convinced that the invasion could not be realized so easily, they switched their targets to eastern Ukraine. In eastern Ukraine, where tensions increased after April, Russia achieved some successes. It had not been long since the invasion, and the war had not yet put economic pressure on Russia. The early stages of the war, in which heavy weapons were used incalculably, caused serious economic and military losses to Russia. The aggressive strategy implemented enabled Russia to gain territory in a short time. This situation, which was seen as a success at first glance, resulted in frustration because it was not managed correctly. It became difficult to complete the food, clothing, and weapon defiances of the soldiers, who moved away from the Russian border. This situation was a major factor in the inability of the Russian army to protect the territories it had won. However, the soldiers who moved away from the Russian border had another problem. We will examine this problem in detail. First of all, the Russian army is not only an army of Russian soldiers. The Russian army is not responsible for all the hundreds of thousands of soldiers fighting in Ukraine. There are many different groups within the army. For example, the Wagner Group, whose name is often heard in the news about war crimes committed in Ukraine, does not belong to Russia. The Wagner Group is made up of mercenaries. These soldiers have committed bloody acts in many countries of the world in favor of Russia. In the wars in many Middle Eastern countries, they have shown ruthless and unethical behavior. Now they are serving for Russia in the occupation of Ukraine. The Russian government refuses to accept any responsibility for this group, which is frequently implicated in criminal offenses. There are also many groups in Syria that were controlled by Russia. Putin has helped the troops of the dictatorial leader Bashar al-Assad in many ways to serve his interest. Before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's entire focus was on Syria. But when Russia began to suffer heavy blows in Ukraine, which did not go according to its calculation, it brought its troops to Ukraine. Not only Russian soldiers and commanders, but also soldiers from the rebel groups it had supported in Syria. National feelings are very important in protracted wars. The motivation of soldiers who fight only for their material interests decreases in long-lasting wars. Fighting against difficulties is a virtue found only in soldiers who love their homeland, and this is the main thing that will bring great harm to Russia. The number of non-Russians among the soldiers fighting in Russia is considerable. Among these soldiers, there are also groups that have been under Russian oppression and persecution for many years. Chechens are the most prominent among the ethnic groups fighting for Ukraine. The persuasion of Chechen soldiers who are fighting at the front of the army by Russia can be seen as a great success. However, this may turn into a big problem for Putin, because it is well known that Chechens, who caused the deaths of many Russian soldiers despite the fact that they had few soldiers during the periods of resistance, are very successful and durable in warfare. It is not important that Putin's relations with Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, whom he always supported and who has helped him in every way, are perfect. What is important is that the Chechen people also feel close to Russia. In any case, societies as well as people have minds. and many painful events that are forgotten or remembered when the time comes. This is what happened in Ukraine. While Russia continues to use the power of Chechen soldiers in the war, there has been a new development that will disrupt the whole balance. The Chechen group, calling themselves Sheikh Mansour Battalion, made a statement that they would not fight for Russia. Group leader Muslim Chebarlo said that no soldier fighting for Russia could be Chechen. He claimed that Chechen troops belonging to the Russian army were not actually Chechen. Thus, they emphasized that the assimilated Chechens, although calling themselves Chechen, were in fact of the same character as the Russians they served. The traces of the suffering inflicted by Russia in Chechnya have not been erased yet, so much so that Sheikh Mansour Battalion sees the war against Russia in Ukraine as a continuation of the war in Chechnya, saying that they were called to Kiev by the Ukrainian army. Group leader Muslim Chebarlo said, "Our aim was to come here and take revenge on Putin's government. We have previous experience in Mariupol city. As a result of the recent clashes, the Ukrainian administration asked us to come to Kiev. We are currently in Kiev. We have a positive working relationship with the Ukrainian leadership. I cannot disclose the exact number of our troops, but I can say that we are now 2 to 3 times more than when we first started." It is known that Chechens who are victims of war and have migrated to many countries around the world have joined the Ukrainian army to take revenge against the Russian army. Chechen groups in the Ukrainian army do not receive money like Chechens who support Russia. They fight completely voluntarily and say that there is no difference between Chechens in the Russian army and Russians. Amid all these events, it is impossible for Putin to maintain a steady progress within the army. A claim was made by a Ukrainian soldier about the racism experienced by Chechen soldiers in the Russian army. According to the allegation, Russian soldiers assigned Chechen soldiers to guard the most dangerous areas. Chechens are assigned to explore vulnerable open areas with the highest probability of air attack. In addition, despite all these distinctions, Chechens' ranks in the army are considerably lower than Russian soldiers. Although Chechens forget their past, their place in the minds of Russians is the same. The presence of different nationalities and non-Russian mercenaries in the Russian army affects the Russian army's determination in the war compared to the Ukrainian army. This summarizes the reasons for the retreat of the Russian army, which occupied many cities in the early stages of the war. It was inevitable that, as the army moved away from Russia's borders, their self-confidence decreased. In addition, when the offensive stopped, counterattacks from the Ukrainian side frightened the Russian army. The army is made up of patriotic soldiers who are tightly knit together. No soldier fighting for freedom can be compared to a paid hitman. In every period of history, victorious armies have had in common that they believed in a sacred value at the risk of death. Do you think the Russian flag can fly forever in the shadow